Solar Power Corporation, 20 Cabot Road, Woburn, Massachusetts, USA. Solar power generator. Model number G361, volts 12. Serial number 2300. Is it possible? Could this be the 2300th solar panel in that model? Is it perhaps a 36 watt panel from back in the way back when? Well, let's see what the gauge says. These batteries started out this morning as 12.4 volts. And I recorded 2.1 amps at 12.5 volts as soon as I actually the charge controller registered 12.4, then it went to 12.5 when it was under charge at 2.1 amps. So there's sometimes a disagreement between the multimeter and the charge controller's digital readout. But yeah, the panel is producing 26 watts. These are 1 amp panels. Together they're producing around about 25, 26 watts. Maintenance charging. The old set of batteries that came out of the pyramid about a year ago, when I bought 6 new 6-volt batteries, 4 of them weren't in too bad a condition. They were about 20% degraded during the 27 and 29 days that it took them to get from the factory in South Australia here to northern New South Wales. I know that because they were 6.31 and 6.33 volts. They should be 6.6 when they're actually new. And for those who've been watching the channel for a while, who will remember this pair, they were 6.01 and 6.03 volts when I received them. So they were like 40% degraded. Having spent, I think I worked it out as 57 days in transit on the way here. But based on how much current they're taking as a maintenance charge at the moment, they're 225 amp hours, so they should in theory take 2.25 amp hours per day to maintain them. Yesterday they took 3 amp hours. The day before they took 3.2 amp hours. And at the moment they've seen 1.5 amp hours. And the charger is holding them down at 0.7 of an amp, 0.4 of an amp now. Yeah, 1.5 amp hours. So, okay, in my estimation, if we accept that 1% of their charge stored is 2.25 amp hours, and it takes 10% more than whatever figure it is you're trying to achieve if you're putting it back in. So I guess 2.4 to 2.5 amp hours would be a reasonable daily maintenance charge. So at our most conservative estimate, there's 0.5 of an amp hour difference between how much current it should take to maintenance charge the batteries if they were in perfect condition, and how much current it is taking to maintenance charge the batteries. Half an amp hour into 2.5 amp hours, I'm pretty sure that's 20%. So I've sort of apparently managed to undo about half of the damage they suffered in transit. They're now functionally only 20% degraded, but I've had to obsess over the bloody things for a year to get them there. These ones that I accepted yesterday, 6.25 volts and 6.24 volts. They've showed up 25% degraded in transit. Maybe I'll be able to get them rehabilitated to the point where they're only 10 or 12% degraded in transit. But the best part of the video, I reckon, is this ancient museum quality solar panel. Now, I have made a few measurements on it. Not only is it putting out 26 watts, if you measure the temperature of the reverse side of the panel where you're looking at the white paint, it's 30 degrees when it's operating. When you look at the back of these little biscuity shaped solar panels, it's 43.3 degrees. So it's shunting heat sideways. They haven't really bothered too much with that. Well, they didn't in, say, the 1990s, I guess. If you look at that centre panel there, that's a 22-year-old 30-watt silicon panel. It's got no white on it anywhere. The whole backing of it is blue, and the silicon crystal slices are shiny, sparkly blue. Somewhere in the piling system, we have a theoretical 70-watt 12-volt panel, which was dropped in transit, and I tried to cure it with a coat of varnish. That didn't work. Underneath that, I suppose that's really only interesting for a size comparison. Showing it here in comparison with a 1990s 60-watt panel, which, just like the 30-watt one I showed you on the tower, it has no attention at all whatsoever paid to attempting to reflectively cool the panel by having a light-coloured backing. By the 20-teens, they had gone back to the light-coloured backing. Anything to try and cool the panel. Because the hotter a solar panel gets, the hotter the wires inside the crystals become. And the hotter the wires become, the greater becomes the resistance to passing electric current through the wires. So therefore, by the 20-teens, use another 70-watt panel. I'd say that one, I bought it maybe 7 years ago, perhaps a bit less, 5 years ago. These outlying panels, they're 30-watt gallium arsenide panels. Once again, no attention's been paid to trying to cool it. They're sort of grey with a rainbowy, iridescent sheen of an effect to them. They're allegedly more efficient than a silicon panel in low light or cloudy conditions. This I bought a year ago. It's a 170-watt panel. I have seen it pump out 10 amps into a 225 amp hour 12-volt battery that had just done a 15% charge capacity duty cycle. So this is literally 5 times the output of this. But this has got to be 30 years old. Of course, I had to do some work. What you see there is some removed and soaked in petrol and cleaned up brass screws and washers, and a couple of missing washers were replaced. I cut the insulation on the end of the wires, and I replaced the diode, which was in particularly poor condition. having been blown in half at some point in the panel's career when somebody's connected it up to the battery backwards. The part that I find most juicy though is that it doesn't have any aluminium frame at all, and it appears to be actually glass, but I'm willing to stand corrected on that issue. At some point I'm going to have to make a wooden frame for it and probably repaint the back of it with white paint, but that's at least some kind of an answer to people who complain that solar panels don't last long enough, because that's 1 year old, and admittedly it's putting out 5 times the power for only perhaps twice the area. But this one, it's got to be 30 years old. I'm going to say that's a mid to perhaps early 1980s solar panel. I've never actually got this close to one that old before. It was being discarded by someone who was getting rid of his father's, he described it as gambling losses, things his old man bought at auction sales and then never got around to selling or couldn't find a buyer for. So at some point somebody's connected that up backwards and thought they've killed the panel and pulled it out of service. How long it's been in service, nobody knows, but we do have a clue with this piece of 240 volt alternating power cord that's been used to wire the thing up. As I was about to say, on this piece of sheathing, the particular piece that used to go in about that place there, which I cut off and removed for the sake of neatness and so I could get a bit of free play access to those wires, there was a remnant part of the markings that come equipped on the outside of all new electrical cables, and it had a date of 1993. Where it is now, I'm not entirely certain. I did intend to save it for the video. You'll just have to take my word for it. It did exist at a point in time not too long ago. And for a brief period in time, perhaps half as long as it takes to make a cup of coffee, I was feeling pretty pleased with it. I thought, haha, we've got a date that's a 29-year-old solar panel. But no, all that tells us is the date of manufacture of the piece of cord with which somebody has repaired the solar panel. Perhaps, if anybody's sufficiently interested and they have the searching skills, they can get in touch with the Solar Power Corporation at 20 Cabot Road, Woburn, Massachusetts, 01801 USA, solar power generator, model G361, volts 12, serial number 2300. And they can tell them that this particular unit not only still exists, it's still in use, and maybe they can tell us how long ago they manufacture-ficated it. My plan is not to use it continually. I'm going to restore it as much as I can and then use it as my spare 25 watt solar panel or 26 watt solar panel to be applied as and where I find a need to have a spare solar panel, because I've got a regulator that'll go with it, a little 10 amp one, not that big 30 amp job that's there. The 30 amp job that's regulating this at the moment, it'll go with a pair of new 80 watt panels, and my 1986 vintage 300 watt 12 volt 240 volt inverter, and that will constitute the bootstrap package that will come up here to the yurt and provide the darling Dot-R child with lights, laptop, and maybe recharge the walkie-talkies for the next day's traffic control Nazi dancing around the stop slow pole, as she does, to make her money. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. A man of many solar panels, if I do say so. Myself. Ciao.